What's your Catholic drive time?
With Joe McClane
Edward on
and
the line.
EmilyiAlcaraz.
Edward, good morning to you. Thank you for being a part of our program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Maybe you can start. I just read a good chunk of your article that you put out most recently on the National Catholic Register about the Vatican scandal, but maybe you can give us the background.
Sure. Yes. Well, this relates to some details of funds which were transferred from the Vatican to Australia, which came up in response to a question asked in the Australian Senate about these allegations of money coming from the Vatican to Australia during the time that Cardinal Pell was being arraigned and tried in Australia, for which he was fully acquitted. And the suspicions were that this money was being used really to really frame Cardinal Pell and get him found guilty over in Australia, so that it would take him out of scrutinizing Vatican finances over here. Cardinal Pell was the treasurer of the Vatican. Now, what came up in this answer is that one point much more money than was expected came up in the details, and as much as $1.8 billion. Now, we don't know, of course, whether that money was what the purpose was for that money. We don't know really anything about it yet. But as you said earlier, this is being investigated by the Vatican and by the Australian authorities to find out exactly what this money was. Now, the Vatican has since said that the figures were probably incorrect and that it was much less than that. And if so, if it's significantly less, then it was perhaps just standard money flows from the Vatican to Australia regarding helping finance the nunciature, for example, and charities over there. And that may be the reason. But at the moment, we really don't know. And there's lots of suspicions that there was perhaps money laundering going on or some sort of dirty money being sent through the Vatican to Australia. But as I say, we don't know what that is, and we won't know probably for a few weeks yet.
In the article, there was seems like the Vatican officials disputed the number, $1.8 billion. Did they suggest a number they thought was more likely?
They haven't yet. No, they say, as you say, significantly less, but that could be anything, of course. And we don't know yet. I mean, if the actual figures are being perhaps. Some people are saying, well, they're not so much because perhaps they've got something to hide. We don't know that yet. But, we've just got to wait and see really what the actual figures are. But certainly it's a big number so at the moment that we have seen reported. And so that's obviously alarming quite a few people.
47,000 transfers. That's a lot. Edward Pentin, Emily here. How is it that 47 separate transfers happened and nobody took notice of this? No one in the Vatican or among the Australian bishops. Who is in charge of this?
Well, this is the big question, because the problem with the Vatican is that there's a lot that lots of left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, especially when it comes to finances, because there's not a centralized financial authority, which is what
Edward
wanted.
Edward, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought.
Sure thing. Yes. Well, I was just saying that there's a lack of centralized authority in the Vatican regarding finances. So there's a lot of things that go undetected, and I think this is possibly one of those things. Now, the good thing about all of this is that it's showing really what needs to be done with the Vatican finances and how they need to be cleaned up. And one of them is centralizing the authority, which Pope Francis is doing. The problem is that Cardinal Pell advocated centralizing the Vatican finances back in 2014, 2015 when he became treasurer. But it's unfortunately the Pope listened more to others who were more interested in keeping autonomy with different Vatican departments, and so this hasn't actually happened until now. But if it had happened earlier, then we might not have got these kind of anomalies. So that's at least something that's good that's coming out of this. And another problem with the Vatican is that there's never been a sort of general audit. There's never been an internal or external audit of the Vatican. So no one really knows how much money is sort of moving around in the Holy See. So again, that's another thing that needs to be looked at, and perhaps that's another good thing to come from this.
One of the stories over the past few years. I mean, Vigano was in charge of the bank reform, and then he got shipped to the United States. Pell, and then, of course, we all know what happened to Cardinal Pell. There was a desire to have the bank audited, and that got squashed after Pell ended up in prison. Wasn't that the case?
Yes, in fact, Cardinal Pell authorized the first ever external audit by PricewaterhouseCoopers to come into the Vatican and have a good examination of all of the books. And then when they got to the Secretariat of State, they started analyzing those. Then Cardinal Angelo Becciu, who was a deputy in the Secretariat of State, cancelled the audit just after 4 months of it beginning. And so even though there was attempts back in 2016 to have this audit, it wasn't successful because of these various groups in the Vatican who want to keep the autonomy, because there's corruption there, and there's things that they don't want found out, and so unfortunately that audit was abandoned. But maybe in the future it'll happen.
Well, I'm going to ask a speculative question. Feel free to answer or not, I guess. But what would stop His Holiness Pope Francis from demanding an audit? I mean, he's the Pope. Can he do that?
Well, it's a good question. Yes, I mean he could, and that's the Pope really can do anything. And if he really instructed that, then that would probably go ahead. But and that's one of the questions why it hasn't been done. But Cardinal Becciu, who was the one, as I said, who stopped it, he's now been moved aside. He's now in the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, so he doesn't really have much authority anymore over this. And so perhaps now it could happen. Certainly, the new heads in the Vatican finances seem to know what they're doing and seem to be very committed to financial reform. And so perhaps it's just a matter of time before they do have a proper audit.
Let's go back to the number. The Australian authority said there was an Australian newspaper who reported 1.8 billion, and the Vatican authorities, according to your article, said they contest that it's substantially less. Whatever the number is, can you tell us where did this money come from? Is this donations from the faithful all over the world? Are these investments that nefarious characters have been put into the Vatican bank? Where's the origin of this money?
Well, this is the question, because, I mean, if it's much less, then it could well just be standard funds being channeled to Australia from the Vatican, which wouldn't be suspicious. But if it is anything like 1.8 billion, then that would obviously point to money laundering and drug money, but something like that. And that's quite possible. But that money, of course, wouldn't be coming from the Vatican. That would be from dubious sources, perhaps the organized crime groups, using the Vatican as a kind of offshore playground, rather, if you like, to sort of ship money around the world without trace. And certainly the Vatican has been used for that in the past. There have been only recently revelations of what are called Ciphered Accounts in APSA, which is a department of the Vatican which deals with real estate and assets. And these Ciphered Accounts were held in Switzerland, and various lay faithful or not necessarily faithful, but lay people were using those Ciphered Accounts to basically escape authorities and tax evasion and so forth. And these accounts had the Vatican's label on them, but of course they had no name of who they belonged to, and so they could use those accounts without any trace. And certainly those existed up until only recently. I asked the head of APSA last week, Archbishop Galantino, if these accounts existed, if they could have been related to these transfers to Australia, and he said they have no record of these Ciphered Accounts anymore, but certainly they existed in the past. So it's quite possible that they could have been using those.
So we saw just a couple weeks ago that the Holy Father issued a motu proprio taking the management of finances away from the Secretariat of State. Do you see this as a positive move?
Yes, I think it is, Emily, definitely, because a lot of the corruption, aside from this Australia case, has happened in the Secretariat of State with these Swiss bank accounts that they had, which were off the balance sheets, off the books. And there was this big, obviously, many listeners may know about this, but this very big losses that the Vatican incurred through a London property deal that they made back in the 2010s, which caused a lot of a lot of losses for the Vatican, and that was done through the Secretary of State and those accounts. And so by transferring them to APSO, which seems to be much better than it used to be in terms of transparency, that may well avoid that happening in the future. So that's certainly a positive move, definitely, and it's a way to improve supervision and control and transparency, which is clearly much needed in the Vatican these days.
We're talking with Edward Pentin. He is with the National Catholic Register. We've linked to his article on this subject over at facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time. Just look for the live video link there. You'll see it. But Edward, we have about, 6 minutes left in our conversation with you, maybe 5 minutes left in our conversation with you. Speaking of Cardinal Pietrelcin, I think in this story, Edward, if I went home today and stopped and spent $20, by the time I got home, my wife would want an accounting. What did I do with that money? However much money was spent here, it seems like it's not enough to just take away his access, but shouldn't he be held accountable as Secretary of State? And then, of course, there's apparently the Editoriale Domini, this Italian media outlet, is reporting a supposed alleged linked letter with his name and signature, stating that he is behind the €150 million loan that was related to the London property. Is there a credibility there? Should there be some accountability with Pietrelcin in particular, Edward Pentin?
Well, yes, up to a point. Certainly there needs to be accountability and transparency, a much increased amount of that. But regarding Cardinal Parolin, I think it's a bit unfair to say that he was responsible for that deal, as that report said, because he basically came along afterwards, after the deal was made by Cardinal Becciu and actually Cardinal Bertoni, who was Cardinal Parolin's predecessor. I have a piece on this coming out soon, so that'll clarify some of this. But certainly Cardinal Parolin that story really showed that he was trying to stem the losses that had been incurred by his predecessors. And although he seemed to think they were valid investments, he did at least try to stem the losses for the Vatican, and failed. But yes, certainly there needs to be sort of more accountability, and really people brought to trial, and those who are guilty of causing these great losses for the Vatican need to be held accountable, and that's something which may happen in the future. But at the moment, it seems unlikely, partly because the Vatican's tribunals don't seem to be suited to dealing with sort of financial crime and prosecuting financial crime. That seems to be a problem, and that's another aspect that needs to be looked at. Certainly, they're being pressured to do so by Moneyval, which is part of the Council of Europe, which is trying to help the Vatican root out vulnerabilities to money laundering and so forth. But there's still quite a long way to go, it seems, really, to bring about that sort of transparency and accountability that many people would like to see regarding the Vatican finances.
So what's the future look like? Is there a day going to happen in the future where we can expect that the Vatican Bank gets cleaned up and we have transparency and donor dollars from all over the world aren't used in things like, movies and properties and things like that, but are used for the corporate works of charity, mercy?
Well, they do seem to be committed to this. As I said, the head of the Vatican Bank, the head of the Secretariat for the Economy, which is Cardinal Pell's successor, they all seem to be very committed to increasing transparency, making sure that there's proper stewardship of the money in the Vatican, and so that seems to be something that they're committed to. So certainly we can hope for that, but whether we actually see that happen, we'll have to see. But yes, there's still a long way to go, and I think, and the problem is a lot of these financial matters are dealt with by priests who aren't trained in this sort of area. They may be bishops, they may be cardinals, but they're not trained in finances and how to make good investments. And what some people say is really needed is more laity to come on board, lay expertise, the people who really know how to deal with these kind of issues.
Amen. Praise be to God in all things. Edward Pentin from the National Catholic Register, we're grateful for your time this morning, and thank you for being a part of our program and giving us some insight into this difficult topic.
Joining us on Your Catholic Drive Time, where it is our pleasure to keep you informed and inspired.
Join us Monday through Friday at the same time, right here on your favorite Catholic radio station.
Don't forget to connect with us. Just go to facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Again, that's facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Be sure to share more than just us today. Share Jesus with everyone you meet.
Bye now, and God love you.